casual setting, but I wanted to ensure I got this to you today. Welcome back to the Twitter Files, Part 10, which was tweeted by David Zweig, spelled Zweig, on December 26, 2022. This is the first of a long-awaited series entitled How Twitter Rigged the COVID Debate. He begins with a summary. He says, by censoring info that was true but inconvenient to U.S. government policy, by discrediting doctors and other experts who disagreed, by suppressing ordinary users, including some sharing the CDC's own data. So far, the Twitter Files have focused on evidence of Twitter's secret blacklists, how the company functioned as a kind of subsidiary of the FBI, and how execs rewrote the platform's rules to accommodate their own political desires. What we have yet to cover is COVID. This reporting for the Free Press at the FP is one piece of that important story. The United States government pressured Twitter and other social media platforms to elevate certain content and suppress other content about COVID-19. Internal files at Twitter that I viewed while on assignment for the Free Press showed that both the Trump and Biden administrations directly pressed Twitter executives to moderate the platform's pandemic content according to their wishes. At the onset of the pandemic, according to meeting notes, the Trump admin was especially concerned about panic buying. They came looking for help from the tech companies to combat misinformation about runs on grocery stores. But there were runs on grocery stores. It wasn't just Twitter. The meetings with the Trump White House were also attended by Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and others. When the Biden admin took over, one of their first meeting requests with Twitter executives was on COVID. The focus was on anti-vaxxer accounts, especially Alex Berenson. In the summer of 2021, President Biden said social media companies were killing people for allowing vaccine misinformation. Berenson was suspended hours after Biden's comments and kicked off the platform within the following month. Berenson sued and then settled with Twitter. In the legal process, Twitter was compelled to release certain internal communications, which showed direct White House pressure on the company to take action on Berenson. A December 2022 summary of meetings with the White House by Lauren Culbertson, Twitter head of U.S. public policy, adds new evidence of the White House's pressure campaign and cements that it repeatedly attempted to directly influence the platform. Culbertson wrote that the Biden team was very angry that Twitter had not been more aggressive in deplatforming multiple accounts. They wanted Twitter to do more. Twitter executives did not fully capitulate to the Biden team's wishes. An extensive review of internal communications at the company revealed employees often debating moderation cases in great detail and with more care than was shown by the government toward free speech. But Twitter did suppress views, many from doctors and scientific experts. That conflicted with the official positions of the White House. As a result, legitimate findings and questions that would have expanded the public debate went missing. There were three serious problems with Twitter's process. First, much of the content moderation was conducted by bots, training on machine learning and AI. Impressive in their engineering, yet still too crude for such nuanced work. Second, contractors in places like the Philippines also moderated content. They were given decision trees to aid in the process, but tasking non-experts to adjudicate tweets on complex topics like myocarditis and mask efficacy data was destined for a significant error rate. Third, most importantly, the buck stopped with higher-level employees at Twitter who chose the inputs for the bots and decision trees and subjectively decided escalated cases and suspensions. As it is with all people and institutions, there was individual and collective bias. With COVID, this bias bent heavily toward establishment dogmas. Inevitably, dissent yet legitimate content was labeled as misinformation, and the accounts of doctors and others were suspended both for tweeting opinions and demonstrably true information. Exhibit A. Dr. Martin Kulldorff, an epidemiologist at Harvard Medical School, tweeted views at odds with U.S. public health authorities and the American left, the political affiliation of nearly the entire staff at Twitter. Internal emails show an intent to action by a moderator saying Kulldorff's tweet violated the company's COVID-19 misinformation policy and claimed he shared false information. But Kulldorff's statement was an expert's opinion, one which also happened to be in line with vaccine policies in numerous other countries. Yet it was deemed false information by Twitter moderators merely because it differed from CDC guidelines. After Twitter took action, Caldor's tweet was slapped with a misleading label and all replies and likes were shut off, throttling the tweet's ability to be seen and shared by many people, the ostensible core function of the platform. In my review of internal files, I found countless instances of tweets labeled as misleading or taken down entirely, sometimes triggering account suspension simply because they veered from CDC guidance or differed from establishment views. A tweet by Kelly K. G.A., a self-proclaimed public health fact-checker with 18,000 followers, was flagged as misleading and replies and likes disabled, even though it displayed the CDC's own data. Internal reports show that a bot had flagged the tweet and that it received many tattles, what the system amusingly called reports from users, that triggered a manual review by a human who, despite the tweet showing the actual CDC data, nevertheless labeled it misleading. Tellingly, the tweet by @KellyKGA that was labeled misleading was a reply to a tweet that contained actual misinformation. COVID has never been the leading cause of death from disease in children, yet that tweet remains on the platform and without a misleading label. Whether by humans or algorithms, content that was contrarian but true was still subject to getting flagged or suppressed. This tweet was labeled misleading, even though the owner of this account @BIUSZ, a physician, was referring to the results of a published study. Andrew Bostom, a Rhode Island physician, was permanently suspended from Twitter after receiving multiple strikes for misinformation. One of his strikes was for a tweet referring to the results from a peer-reviewed study on mRNA vaccines. A review of Twitter log files revealed that an internal audit conducted after Bostom's attorney contacted Twitter found that only one of Bostom's 5 violations were valid. The one Boston tweet found to still be in violation cited data that was legitimate but inconvenient to the public health establishment's narrative about the risks of flu versus COVID in children. That this tweet was not only flagged by a bot, but its violation manually affirmed by a staff member is telling of both the algorithmic and human bias at play. Boston's account was suspended for months and was finally restored on Christmas Day. Another example of human bias run amok was the reaction to this tweet by Trump. Many Trump tweets led to extensive internal debates, and this one was no different. In a surreal exchange, Jim Baker, at the time Twitter's deputy general counsel, asks why telling people to not be afraid wasn't a violation of Twitter's COVID-19 misinformation policy. Yoel Roth, Twitter's former head of trust and safety, had to explain that optimism wasn't misinformation. Remember @KellyKGA with the CDC data tweet? Twitter's response to her is clarifying. We will prioritize review and labeling of content that could lead to increased exposure or transmission. Twitter made a decision via the political leanings of senior staff and government pressure that the public health authorities' approach to the pandemic, prioritizing mitigation over other concerns, was the science. Information that challenged that view, such as showing harms of vaccines or that could be perceived as downplaying the risks of COVID, especially to children, was subject to moderation and even suppression, no matter whether such views were correct or adopted abroad. What might this pandemic and its aftermath have looked like if there had been a more open debate on Twitter and other social media platforms, not to mention the mainstream press, about the origins of COVID, about lockdowns, about the true risks of COVID in kids, and much more? Here are my final thoughts on Twitter Files 10. Raise your hand if you're tired of hearing "trust the science." How do you feel now that you heard that the science was actually not the science, but the White House narrative? I mean, I wonder how much money these guys actually made from this pandemic. It seemed like a major transfer of wealth to me, but I did that research. Maybe you should too. Stay tuned for more because I think they're going to expose a lot. Thanks for listening.